Hello, everyone. Very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever is according to your time zone. So, a very warm welcome for the React.js components lifecycle. So, in this session, we'll talk about basic introduction about React.js components, especially the props and the state, and we'll see how it can be done. All right. This session, we are going to talk about React components, props, states, flow of the stateless and stateful components, lifecycle of the components, and possibly hands-on. So now let's start with the React components. For those people who are not aware of React perspective, why React came into picture, let me give a brief introduction here. It so happened that in the classical approaches, we had many people dominating the world. Let's say you have Java, Python. Actually, Python came a little bit later, but Java was predominantly dominating it. .NET and let's say PHP. These are the predominantly used ones, Java, .NET, and PHP as a programming perspective. Till HTML4, say before 2011, it was a normal classical things, wherein you had this web application developed in a simple manner, made in three-tier application where the client was talking to the application server and the database server directly. So maximum what you had in terms of the client validation is you had something like say 𝐒𝐧𝐥𝐞 implemented where the client can talk to the database and get the responses. Meaning to say something like this. Let's say if you go with google.com, in here you tried something like say you go with React.js, whatever you see as an output here in this kind of output, this is based upon the 𝐒𝐴𝐺𝐴X implementation, which is developed using JavaScript. This was the maximum thing which was there. But there was a problem in here. The problem is, let's say if you talk about the web application development, let's say if you have one page that needs to be loaded, and this page is going to consist of somewhere around, let's say 250 MB, presume. I'm just giving a hypothetical number here. If this page is 250 MB, each time you refresh a page, the 250 MB is going to be coming into picture. So 2 times you do, it becomes 500 MB. 4 times you do, it becomes 1 GB, right? So presume if your application is very, or let's say too much of data is included and it is going to be 250 MB per request. This is capital B, not small b. Maximum 4 times you refresh the page, your 1 GB is gone. And today, if you see mobile applications has 1 GB to 2 GB predominantly used by the people. So 4 times if you refresh, that's it. Your application is gone. So this was not an effective way of doing things. So during those days, let's say Orkut was there in 2005 to 2010, and eventually Facebook came into picture. When Facebook came into picture, it was more like say they started this Orkut perspective and they opened up the feeds and all those things. The page in here was having so much of information like this. So on here you have the links, you have the status to be mentioned, and you have the feeds which can come into picture and some other links which is going to be there. So let me take up an example here to showcase that. Something like this, wherein you have lot many things which is going to be there. You have some information here which is going to be the links. If you click on that, the relevant page gets loaded up here, and in here you have a lot of feeds. The more you scroll down, the more feeds get loaded up, and so on. If you see here, if I have some data which is going to be loaded up, let's say I have around 100 let's say items to get displayed, all the 100 items will get loaded up in one shot, and your total internet data is gone. Why will somebody use this kind of things, right? Now Imagine if we gave something like say a dynamic perspective, meaning to say you scroll, I'll load the information. And how much you scroll, so much of data will be there. And in here, I'll only load this information. I'll not load this or load this or load this or even this. Whatever you scroll, the information will get loaded up here. Only specific region will get loaded up, and rest of the places, nothing is going to be getting loaded up unless you're going to use it. So if the page is going to be having 250 MB and this particular component is going to have only 10 MB, every time 10 MB gets loaded up, meaning to say the next component 10 MB, in the next component 10 MB. So in here 10 pieces, in here 10 pieces, and in here 10 pieces or 10 links. For 10 links, 10 MB. Effectively, to reach this 250 MB, you need to scroll at least 25 times. Only then 250 will come into picture. So effective utilization is going to come into picture, right? So to have this kind of implementation, Facebook is actually developed with PHP, to be very honest. They integrated the implementation in such a way that they can come into, acquire this. So they introduced a new technology when HTML5 came into picture with CSS and JavaScript. So till then, JavaScript was very minimalistic used. And those days, the browsers were IE, Internet Explorer browser, which was having a lot of issues. But after the introduction of this Chrome and Firefox, things evolved very quickly to accommodate whatever is the latest technology stack, and JavaScript actually played a major role. In here, the birth of ReactJS came into picture. And this ReactJS, if you see here, it is a JavaScript oriented approach. HTML, CSS is anyways there. On top of it, we define the JavaScript. So HTML and CSS, if you talk about HTML is used for the structure, CSS is used for the styling, and the JavaScript majorly is used for the behavior. So you can control your application completely from the JavaScript perspective, and you can manage the show. And this is what ReactJS offers you, which can help you out to structure any web application in such a way that you can effectively make use of the JavaScript, and which can help out in a very good user interaction and data saving also. And you can keep people engaging with the technology stack. And this has opened up a very big section. So when we talk about this kind of web page here, if you see, you have different layers here, or what we call it as different components. You can have all these components separately designed. So that is what the React.js components, which we are going to look forward. The React.js components on a browser might be different, meaning to say each of them, whatever you see here, right? This section or this section or this one or this one or this one or maybe the top layer. All these things are actually different components. Something like this. Component 1, component 2, component 3, component 4, component 5. All of them are kept on this page individually as though resembling that they're part of the same page. In reality, they are different. Though it is coming as one page view, it is not actually one page view. It is a integration of multiple section. So in the complex terms, if I have to talk about, or in the geekish terms, if I have to talk about, these components are embedded and integrated as one application. Majorly, like say, you can talk about in today's world, like say, single page application perspective, SPA. Okay, put all your components in one page, update the rendering part on each of this page based upon what the user is performing as an action. If the user says I'm going to click on it, or if the user does some scrolling, keyboard and mouse activity, capture that and do the job for your coding perspective. Update only this area without updating any of the rest of the components here. That becomes much more easy to work and evaluate. So with that being said, each of these components are actually getting updated or changed without disturbing any of the application or rest of the application here, which will be very much interesting to do the coding. But how is it going to be involved? So we have something called as UI tree, meaning to say the logical process or logical pieces which is going to be connected to form a single section. What we call it as, like say, parent to child component distribution and so on. In here, the distribution is going to be from the perspective of logical pieces. So as I said, each of them are component. So each of these components, if you talk about, are integrated sometimes, meaning to say it might be integrated in the same page or it might be integrated from 1:2 like this. So let's say if the parent component is piece 1, it is having an, let's say, references to the child components as 2 and 3. It's an integration, not a, let's say, clubbing part. It's more of an integration. 1 is integrated to 2 and 3, and 2 is integrated to 4 and 5. Meaning, so say the binding happens. So any changes, sometimes you might look around, like say, if you want to add up something, some data here, and you want to pull in here, you can pull in here and you can work on with it. So let's say if you see here, 1 is directly connected to 4 and 5, but it is not directly connected, it is indirectly connected from 2. It connects to 2, from 2 it has a child component. And these are individual components. So why we have this kind of an approach is because of the behavior. You take up a behavior, based upon that you change it. Let's say I want to go out only with feeds as a Facebook feeds. Now, individual first page, the component, you click on that. Let's say if you click on the feed section or the basic links which is available in the Facebook, the first link which is there, you click on it, you get the page loaded here. When this is more of, like say, you have this iframe kind of a concept. So iframe is going to load this second component. Now second component has multiple things. The more you scroll, the more data will get loaded up. It might be, let's say, your friends data which is going to be coming up into picture here. So this one, page 2, is going to be giving you the list. So your friends and family members, whatever, whoever is going to share some data, that is also going to be listed here. And on this section, the interest, let's say you have an interest which is going to be, like say, programming, or maybe like say dog trainings or food or something, those videos are subscribed pages or something will get loaded from this particular section. So both of them will get loaded up one after the other, but it is not going to load as though, well, let's say it is going to load as though it is the same page, but in reality combination of these two will get loaded up here. And the page here is, you have this link, which is the first link. You click on that, the data gets coming into picture, and in this data, 4 and 5 data will get loaded up. So this is component 2, this is component 1. So integration wise, it can happen anyway. The way you design it, it's up to you. The rest of the components and batches are, though it is integrated, it gets triggered only when you call it, or else it will not get triggered. And the changes will happen only if you do some change, like say some actions on that. The rendering part happens, something like that. So let's take a simple example here. Let's say in here we are going to take up a component 1 class, and which let's say everything is done from the React component. You're going to extend the React component, and there is a method called as render. Render method is going to render you the information on the page. Whatever you want to give it as HTML and CSS perspective is going to be rendered from the rendering perspective. Dynamic loading happens. So this is used for dynamic loading. Meaning to say, you don't have to refresh the page. The moment you scroll down, the pages will get loaded up. I'll give you an example here. Let's say I cannot show you the Facebook part. Let me take up something like this. Let's say we go with youtube.com. Okay, so please have a look at it. What is going to be here? In here, let's say we have this, let's say the scroll bar this big, and you have some videos here. All right. So the more you scroll it up, the data gets loaded up here. You can see that it's getting loaded up, right? So once you are loaded up with this data, you can see the scroll size is no longer the same size. It is small now. Why? the DOM is getting loaded up with the data. I did not press the refresh button here. However, the more I scroll, the more data gets loaded up. And the more data gets loaded up, the scroll size will get shortened going forward. Check this out. Like this. Previously it was big, now it is small because the DOM is now loaded up with a lot of data. So this being said, how you're going to achieve out of it? The rendering part. So the more you scroll, the more you get loaded up. And that rendering is dynamic rendering. And in here, you're going to use the code. So usually we take up the return statement, which is like say method here, and you are going to return the statement. So this is a method and you are going to give the return statement. So there are four kinds of methods. One method, the methods are like say with arguments and with return type, without arguments, with return type, with arguments, without return type, and with arguments, with return type. So in here, we are going to take up the without arguments and return type here. So this is the method which we are going to take it up in this kind of programming, and we are going to return the HTML code. In this HTML code, we are going to use the major sections, like say something like you might be using the division tag, pan tags, and so on, so that the differentiation can be coming into picture very easily. Let me show an example which can be much easier for you to understand. Let me take up the direct example, which is like say facebook.com, which can help you to understand this. So if you see this page, you have a lot of components loaded up here, but if you go ahead and inspect it, you can see a lot of things. Most of your components are only div based, division based here, because they're trying to, like say, divide things. If I keep my mouse over here and take a screenshot, sorry, let me take a screenshot, because if I move my mouse, you'll not be able to see that. Let me open up MS Paint and show it to you and paste this value here. So screenshot and paste it. Okay. Sorry, this is not correct. Work properly. Observe very carefully. Each of them are divided here. Specifically, the page is divided in such a way that this is one area, this is second area, this is third area, this is fourth area, this is fifth area. These kind of divisions can be really achieved with respect to this div components. Majorly used in most of the ReactJS based web application. You can see everything coming into picture. In here, two different tags. Whatever you see inside this, each of this, let's say if I go with this kind of implementation, or if I go with this kind of information, you have this tags h2 tag, and you have a class, and you have some information here which is going to be displayed. So this is what we use it. Tag and the information, the styling components, to be very honest. Just like the way we have headers in our web application, let's say in our application perspective, we can use these headers. So with these kind of combinations, the sizes of the font will get changed, and you can render the component here with respect to the information. So we are going to have this as component one, and you're going to render the page as content. Okay. So once you have this components ready, I mean, any HTML tag is going to be opened up and it's going to get closing. The closing tag comes into the picture. Similarly, you'll have this component one closed here. Okay, so it's getting closed as React DOM render document object management, and you're going to use this document.get element with respect to the content will get displayed. So when you do that, your information is going to be available. Now, the next part comes up is, let's say if you're going with the transitions, or let's say connecting page one to page two, or component one to component two, majorly you're going to connect it via the props or the states. The props is nothing but, let's say if I'm going to add up some values. my name there, or my age, or my university, or my country location, and so on. I want to change it. I mean, I want to pass it to the child component. So that can be done from the perspective of props. Meaning to say, I have somebody, let's say, I'm going to say, welcome name, welcome Ramesh. So my name, and it can be something else, let's say Suresh, or let's say Monica, or let's say we have something, let's say Deepa, or maybe somebody else. So these informations are going to be passed down to the child components, because you are having page one here component, then you have components here again, and so on, right? So whatever is there in here, let's say the first page logged in, you get the information, and every time you go into these pages, you need, I mean, and if they are using that component or the properties in the let's say child page components, it has to get the information which is already there from the previous, not querying the previous value, but the current instance itself I want to go into. So instance value, if you talk about, we talk about, like say this dot prop name. Okay, this dot prop name, and you give the information like say Ramesh and so on. So when you talk about the current instance, the logged in instance should be maintained, and it has to make sure that every data should be passed across. To achieve that, properties are used, which we call it as, in short, props. We define a prop in here in the parent component, and when it comes to the child component, we actually use this dot prop name to get the property, and whatever name has been assigned. For example, if it is assigning Ramesh here, Ramesh will get displayed. If you are assigning Suresh, Suresh will get displayed. That's why it's going to take it up. The second one is state. State is going to be telling you what is the current situation from page 1 to page 2 if you are navigating, or from component 1 to component 2 if you are going ahead. You want to look around whether to maintain the state or not. Meaning to say, the states, let's say, for example, if you are logged in, then it should show logout button. If you are logged out, it should show login page. Something like that. A particular state change. So based upon a condition, you can look around. So this state can be stateful or stateless. That depends. All right. So these two are the major section which we are looking around. Meaning to say, if you're talking about the HTML page, yeah, like say web page, you have HTML plus CSS plus the JavaScript. So HTML, again, as I said, it's structure. CSS is styling. So whatever is going to be displayed is the view here. But what needs to be displayed on the view is based upon the JavaScript. In this, you have two major things. One, you have the let's say variables, which is going to be majorly focused on the properties sections, which is props, and the other one behavior, which is the methods. And methods is going to be from the perspective of the steps, which is going to be involving an action. All these things can be controlled by the state, which is state or stateful or statelessness. So that depends. So in here, those are different categories. One is a variable, the other one is a method, to be very honest. In programming world, it's going to be variables and methods. Variables majorly from here, methods from here. All right. So these are going to help you out in terms of implementing it. So properties are going to be the one which is going to be rendered from the parent component to the child component. Let's say if you're going to have header name as Bob and footer name as Alex in the parent component, and use the option, let's say this dot props dot name in the child component, whatever, let's say, options you give, this dot props and the name here, whichever name you give here, it gets located. So the content is, like say, footer content, Alex will get displayed. This is the header content, so Bob will get displayed. So this way you define it, and when you are rendering the page, you can call this. And if you see here, the instance and properties name. Usually the props are going to be helping you out to communicate between let's say component 1 to component 2 with respect to the implementation. However, these properties are immutable, meaning to say you cannot change it. Once you have it in the parent component, the same thing will be there. So you cannot change it. Whatever is declared on the, let's say, the parent class or parent component, the same thing will be available in the child component, and you cannot change it. You just let's say inherit it, just like the way you inherit your let's say family properties, the same thing is going to be inherited here. So usually when we talk about the component section, you in let's say if in your HTML you have something called as attributes. Let's say you have a tag name and you have a key value pair here. Key is equal to value. This is the attribute, key and attribute value. This is the attribute part. Similar to this HTML code, you're going to use the properties. Okay. So sometimes you might see name here, which is like this. If I say, if I'm going to take up this particular section, you have this name here, which is coming as email. Okay. So whatever name is coming here, this is the attribute in HTML. But you can connect this from the properties perspective also. The same thing. Just like this, what you see here works similar to the HTML attributes only. Whatever you define here, for example, if you see, you can see that email address or phone number to be displayed. That's coming up from the placeholder here. Okay. So what is getting displayed here is coming from this particular information. The same thing is what you're going to use it in the props also. Similar to what you see as an attribute, properties are also going to be the same thing. Like say, just like the HTML attribute, it's going to be the same thing. And it usually has top to bottom approach, meaning to say you have a properties, you get to this component from here, the second component from here, the third component, it gets the flowing part. It's not the reverse order. It's always the top to bottom approach. The data flows from parent component to the child component. And it is one way. There is no backward. Bottom to top operation is not possible. Only the unidirectional data flow, top to bottom. And it is immutable. You cannot change it. Whatever you get it in the top level, the same thing can be passed to the bottom level, but you cannot change it. And you can set the default props also. Sometimes you might want to set up a default values. You can set it up also so that it can be refreshed everywhere. The next section in here, let's say you can see this is from the ES5 perspective, the coding perspective. The current one is ES6. If you see here, you have this implementation sending props. You can set the names and when somebody is going to call it here. So if you see very closely, it has a header name as Bob, again header as Max and footer name as Alan. When you're calling it up, header, this dot prop, you have this value, footer, you have the value. So the place where you have defined this names as Bob, Max, and Alan will get displayed here according to the calls. So you have this body and you have this render function and you have this child components, which is going to be calling the classes and which is going to be calling this parent class implementation, this dot props dot name, which is going to be the header section in here, and footer section, this dot props dot name. So when you define this as header and footer, you can see header value Bob and Max will get displayed, footer value Alan will get displayed here when you're rendering the page. So now let's talk about the state part. In a state, what happens is we are going to check out a particular state, meaning to say, let's say you talk about an ice here. Ice is not going to change unless an external factor comes into the picture. So if you increase the temperature, the solid state of this water, which is in ice, is now going to be converted to a liquid state, which is water. Solid to liquid conversion with the increase of temperature. And reverse is solid. But we are not talking about the reverse part. We are talking about the parent to child combination, unidirectional flow. So in here, we are not talking about the reverse direction. We are going to talk about the one direction. Let's say a page is logged in. You as a user, you log in. So it's already logged in. The state, if you click on a button, let's say logout button, the state will now change from logged in to logged out. Or let's say I talk about one particular section, meaning to say I have a counter resume. So if you click on this, number of times you clicked will get increased. To be very honest, I cannot show you the coding right away of doing it. Let me take up something directly from the system itself. Let's go with ReactJS and go to the tutorial part. And let's say we go with section here. So presume like this. The moment you click on it, the value comes up. Click here, the value comes up. Say this. So unless you click, the operations will not change. If I refresh this, you can see nothing has happened. So the page is available. Only thing is external factor. You click on it, automatically it will get changed. All right, something like this. Or let's say I'll talk about something like ReactJS tutorial. I'm going to take up a simple example so that you can understand it. No, not this one. Let's say we go with something like this is tic-tac to one, getting started. Let's say ReactJS state tutorial. Start coming up here. I don't have it here. Sorry, there is some place where I can get that. No, not here. Okay, let's not talk about too much. Let's say in here only I have showed you. The moment you click on it, you can see an option coming up, right? So unless you click on it, it will not change. So in here, states are going to be using this kind of implementation. Now, in this code, if you see, there are a lot of things which is coming up. Okay, you have a square, which is going to have the, let's say, on click operation. On properties click, you're going to get this. And each of this, let's say this dot properties dot squares, you have the square and I here. On click, I here. And on the return perspective, you have this rendered information. Okay, so render this information, and when you are doing the click operation, you're going to perform some operations. One by one, you're going to get this, and you're going to maintain the history also. Okay, stateful implementation. So what was happened previously, you're going to do it. So this way, the code is written in such a way that it can do the changes. Okay, so what happens is, unlike properties, it is not, let's say, immutable, it is mutable, meaning to say it's going to have some information. Okay, so what was the parent section? When you are having some operations done, click or type, you're going to get the operations updated. The values previously, let's say if Ramesh is the name which was given, the same thing is retained. It is immutable. In here, it is mutable, meaning to say, if you see here, it is getting muted. The moment you click on it, it gets muted up. The initial section is nothing. After that, it gets updated. So it's a mutable section. These sections are going to be changing or rendered based upon a behavior. Maybe let's say a click operation, or maybe let's say mouse scroll operation, something. You're going to capture it and you're going to do it. It is the actual core of the React components, and it must be usually kept simple. Don't complicate it. If you see this code here as an example, each of them are really simple. You don't go ahead with too much of complication. It is very simple. Okay, the thumb rule in programming says that when you write a method, try to keep this method with 8 to 10 lines as much as possible. Don't complicate it. Don't write everything in one method. If possible, try to redirect it in, let's say, method 1, method 2, method 3, and try to reuse them one by one. That's the programming concepts. Only if it is not possible to do the reusing, go ahead with writing it in one component more than 10 lines, but as much as possible, try to reduce it within 20 lines so that you don't complicate it. So the same thing is applicable here also. Make it very simple. So when a component, you are actually passing a property and so on, this is the second component. The second component behavior changes at a state level. When you click on it, the third component may come into picture. Okay, again, the state part. So states are going to be of two categories. One, you have, like say, stateless and statefulness. Let's say if you talk about stateful, whatever happened in the first request, it is maintained. So this is going to be loaded in the RAM or the memory, and it's going to be retained. So when the second request comes up, the previous data also is loaded and you're going to check it out. For example, as a user, I log in. So the status is logged in. It is available, logged in status. The second components, whatever is going to be displayed right here, is based upon the login section only. Okay. So something like this. You go to YouTube page. The moment you are logged in, let's say this is sign in, you are logged in, you click on any of this link. For example, I'm going to choose this songs. Okay. In this, whatever you see here, if you see the previous page and the current page, the same state is maintained. History is maintained. It's not going to log off unless there is a state change. So statefulness will actually keep up the previous values. Whereas statelessness, the request when it comes up and you send the response back, it is done. The second page is not going to have the previous records, and it is clean slate, meaning to say every time it's going to be a fresh call. You don't maintain a previous record, meaning to say you're logged in, you're logged out, doesn't matter. Whatever you send across, the same thing will come into picture here. So previous state of operations are not recorded. And that's why usually speaking, statefulness are called as the smart components and the statelessness are called as the dumb components. But on the other hand, please understand when you're going with statefulness, you're actually increasing the memory. So the performance also comes into the picture here. So you should be always looking around how much data needs to be stored and how much should not. Majorly, the cookies and all those things will be stored. And from that cookies perspective, you can take a call on what was the previous session. Okay. So the cookies part, when I'm talking about what we do is, let's say, when we are talking about the banking transactions, okay, in the banking transactions, let's say I'm going to use this, let's say one of the laptop, and I'm going to use one of the browser, let's say Chrome browser, and I make a request. So when it goes to the bank, it actually sees that it has a request has come up afresh. You're going to come back here and you're going to store some data information as cookies. So the next time when you're doing the call, you can take up the check whether this cookies is coming into picture or not. If the cookies is not there, I'm not going to install the cookies again. I'm going to reuse the same cookies. If it is not there, it's going to be there. I mean, let's say I'm going to install it. So this kind of information, I can make it from the statefulness. Okay, so one is this. The second one is you have the cookies and you have the session IDs. So session IDs are going to be majorly for statefulness, logged in, logged out, and so on. You have a session ID. From that, you can make sure that the previous history is still retained. So if I'm making any search in the history in the browsers, and let's say I'm going to search for ReactJS tutorials, or maybe let's say how to cook, how to train my dog, or how to learn, let's say driving the bike, how to, I mean, safety precautions taking while going for a long ride and so on. All this history is going to be maintained in the statefulness, and I can use it for the futuristic aspect. So when some information is going to be displayed on my screen, it's going to be based upon the previous history such as which I've done. But on the statelessness, this is not going to happen. Okay, so it comes with a little bit responsibility where you have the memory also coming into picture. So usually statelessness calculates the state of in the state of the component and contains no past information or current or future possible informations. However, statefulness will actually have the past information, current information, and futuristic information which can come into picture. So this is the structure of stateful state section. And when you talk about the state perspective, you can have stateful and child component as stateless. You can maintain the history here and you can ignore the history. The other way around is not possible. You cannot have statelessness, under that you cannot have stateful. That's not possible at all. Okay, stateful, and under that you can have a stateful or stateless session. That depends. But the other way around is not possible. Stateless to stateful is not possible. So this is about the states part. And the flow of the components are going to be like this. Let's say, as I said, right, initial setup, I'm not logged in, I'll set it as false. When I come to the child section, as I said, initially in this section, when I was in this page, it was not logged in. When I come to the next page, it's still going to be showing us not logged in because the state is not changed. The moment I click on this, let's say I'm going to click on sign in page, receive the click, and you're going to, let's say, set the properties as logged in. From now on, when this operation has been completed in here, it's going to be carry forward with that only. So the next components, the next pages, let's say if I'm going to click on any other links here, presume I'm going to take up this. So in here, after click, let's say logging in this particular section, I'll have the retain of the session, which will be logged in only. Unless and until I click on logout, it's not going to work. So in here you have these things. Let's say I have some information as multiple data here. I'm a stateful and all those things. And if you click on this button, you'll be logged in. If you're clicking on again, it will be logged out or something. As a demo part, I'm going to show you here. So this is the pages perspective. So in here, not logged in, and click here to log in. The moment you click on this, it says click out to logged in. Log out, and it will say you're logged out. Sorry, you're logged in. So the state changed from here to the state change here. Okay, so these components get loaded up dynamically, but this data is not. Meaning to say, only the changes which happened on this page is section 1, section 2. Rest of these sections are not even changed. This is about how it's going to be rendered and implemented. As of now, I cannot show you the demo because of the time constraint, but you can see that it happens. So there are 4 components of lifecycle phases. You have initial phase, you have updating phase, you have props change phase, and you have unmounting phase. Initial phase is the place where you're going to load the data to the DOM. So you have different options like say get default props, whatever is being default there. Initial state of the props, like say whether you're logged in or logged off. Initially, we set it to logged out, and component will mount, meaning to say sometimes you might look around whether the component needs to be loaded or not loaded. In here, the initial phase will always go ahead with component will be mounted here. And the next one is going to be rendering phase, which is going to be the data which is going to be rendered as a view perspective. And post that, checking out whether the component has been mounted or not. This is the initial phase of a ReactJS lifecycle page. The second one is updating phase. Now you have the page, you are going to do some operations, scrolling up or clicking on that. So you have different options. The method is, should the component update? There are chances. Sometimes you might want to update, sometimes you don't want to update. So in here, if you want to go ahead with that for a particular section, you can go ahead with, should the component with update? Based upon yes or no, you can update it. The second one, compulsorily you are going to update. Component will update. You do any changes, it gets updated. Then rendering part. And after that, having update whether the component did update or not. The third one is prop change, meaning to say from one place to another place, you're going to do the changes. So in here, similar to updating phase, you have all those things. Should component update, the component will update, render, and component did update. Only external one is from parent component to the child component, you're going to pass the properties. So components will receive the properties. Changing perspective. Logging in, logged in the value, like say the name of the user is Ramesh. The property is now name is Ramesh. That Ramesh is going to be coming into picture here. Okay, so that is component receiving phase or component changing phase. Okay, the last one is unmounting phase. After you have done some operation, you want to remove it off or trash it off. Presume, let's say there are some information which is going to be removed off after you log off. Let's say in your banking application. When you log off, your session ID should be removed off. Your, let's say, unnecessary cookies which is relevant to this session ID should be removed off. Or some page, let's say information based upon, let's say, welcome Ramesh and all those things which was there in the page. Those information which is there as an HTML perspective should be removed off because you don't want to keep the trace of it. Meaning to say all this information needs to be removed from the DOM structure. That will be done from the component will be unmounted section. By default, it has to be compulsorily done, and that's the reason it will say will unmount anything which is there from the DOM. Inside the DOM, that data needs to be removed. You're going to do the unmounting phase. And this is the important phase for the last section, which is the logout section or something like that. And this four life cycles is explained here. As I explained previously, you're going to, in the initial stage, setting up the props, setting up the state, and all those things one by one, all whatever four phases we have, right? So it is explained in the, let's say, hierarchical perspective here, how each of them will get called, how each of them will be used. That's it. We'll see you on the other side, guys. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.